Welcome to Odds Bodkins Curiosity Shoppe, where you'll find the unique, the bizarre, and sometimes the haunted. Feel free to look around, peruse the items, and never fear. There's nothing here that bites. Hard, anyway. Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of Odds Bodkins Curiosity Shoppe. I am your shopkeeper, and this is your home for all things horror, fantasy, and science fiction. Today, an interesting item that just came into the shop. If you'll take a look over here, we've placed this in our section dedicated to dolls, marionettes, puppets, and the like. This a very lifelike doll made by a particular doll maker. Now, the interesting thing about this is if you kind of rattle the head, you'll hear something rolling around inside. Now, I've had my shop clerk Mordecai look at this, and we've determined that it's best left undisturbed, for if we were to uncover the mystery of what's inside this doll, it could unleash horrors the likes of which we may have just seen in a new film. So let's pull out the kinetoscope and take a look at Longlegs. So Longlegs is a movie that just came out this past weekend, and while it isn't a movie that I've been looking forward to, I was interested in it because it had a couple things going for it. Odds Perkins, the son of Psycho star Anthony Perkins, is the director, and while he doesn't have a huge resume of things that I've seen, he does have, some things to his credit. I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House, Gretel and Hansel that came out a few years ago. He's going to be doing that adaptation of the Stephen King short story, The Monkey, which I'm always hesitant about Stephen King adaptations, but it is an interesting story, and one of the stories I loved in Skeleton Crew, so I am, as much as I don't want to look forward to it and I don't want to get my hopes up, I am interested to see what they do. And given the fact that I've just watched Odds Perkins' Longlegs, if he gives this, The Monkey, the adaptation that we're going to get next year, this kind of a treatment in the psychological horror and the tension and atmosphere building, I think it could be a good King adaptation. So I'm on the fence about that, whether I'm excited or not. But Longlegs has him directing this, so I was really interested there. And the fact that it has Nicolas Cage. And Nicolas Cage is one of those actors that you either think he's brilliant or you're just not a big fan of his work. And I don't want to say every performance of his is brilliant. I think he does put out some brilliant performances. And I was really interested to see what sort of performance we were going to get out of Nicolas Cage, because he does play the titular serial killer Longlegs. I mean, that's established in the trailer, so that's not a big spoiler or anything. But I wanted to see how, are we going to get balls to the wall, Nicolas Cage just being as over the top as he can be, or is it going to be more of a reserved serial killer type of portrayal? It really intrigued me as to what Nicolas Cage performance we were going to get with this movie. And then, of course, you add on top of that, It Follows star Micah Monroe, which I've been more and more becoming a fan of hers. I loved It Follows. I haven't seen a ton of things that she's been in since then, but then in 2022, Watcher came out, which I really liked her in that. And now Longlegs, they've got They Follow, the sequel to It Follows, coming up sometime in the not too distant future, I imagine. It's in post-production, but everything I've watched of hers, I've really enjoyed her performance, and this was no different at all. I really loved Micah Monroe's performance alongside Nick Cage. I thought those two really made this, and some other notable actors. We'll get into that once we get into the spoiler section. But really, this movie is a movie that, well, it is a horror film. It is more of a psychological horror film. I've heard people comparing it to Silence of the Lambs. To me, it felt like Silence of the Lambs meets certain aspects of The Omen, which I found really interesting, and I absolutely loved this movie. I don't know as if I would say it's the best horror film of the year, because like I said, it is more of a psychological horror as opposed to a straight up horror film. There are a couple jump scares, there are a couple good jump scares, but there's not a ton of scares. This movie definitely depends on the atmosphere and the building of tension, and really even more so than that, a building of dread. From the very first scene, you get this slow burn snowball rolling down a hill, getting bigger and bigger, gaining more and more momentum, feel of dread to this movie that it just had me kind of tensed up the whole time, and I really love that. If I'm not going to get scares, I want to be scared. And the type of dread they built with this was just the right type of scary for this horror film. So I don't want to talk too much more about this without being able to talk about it, without being free to talk about it as I please. So we are going to get into some spoiler territory. So if you haven't watched Longlegs, go check it out in the movie theater right now, because it is definitely worth a watch. If you're a horror fan, if you like psychological horror, psychological thrillers, if you like a good mystery, an FBI mystery, it's got that element to it that I think you're not going to be disappointed. I know the ending, some people aren't quite happy with, not so much the ending, but how abruptly it ends. That didn't bother me. I felt the ending was satisfying enough that you didn't need a denouement where you're explaining everything that just happened. It just ends cold, and to me that was a satisfying enough ending. But go check it out. Longlegs in theaters now. If you have watched it or you don't care about spoilers one way or the other, we are going to head on into some spoiler territory right now. So I thought the open of this movie was really good and really set the table for the type of movie that you're going to watch. You see this little girl, it's set back in the mid-70s, I think 74. It's winter, there's snow on the ground, probably November, probably more like December, depending on what part of the country you're in. But you have this girl, she's probably like 12, 13, 14 years old. I'm not sure exactly how old she's supposed to be, but this car pulls up and she goes outside and comes across the Longlegs character, the Nicolas Cage character, and it's so creepy and so disturbing, and they film it in, I don't even know if it was 3:4 aspect ratio. It was a 3:4 like aspect ratio. To me, it almost felt like you were looking at one of those old photographs from the 70s where like the edges are rounded, like the corners are rounded. I know my mom in a lot of her old photo albums has photos just like that. It had that patina to the picture. Like I said, it almost looked like you were looking at an old photograph come to life from 1974. And when you meet the Longlegs character, it is shot from the perspective of a little girl. So you're only seeing like, from the chest down, but you're hearing this weird, creepy voice, and you all of a sudden you hear him say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I brought my long legs," and then he pops down into frame, and his face is so pale and pasty, like it almost has like stage makeup on, and they've got these prosthetics on Nick Cage's face, and this weird, like long-haired wig, and the voice he's doing, it's just so creepy and disturbing. He pops down in the frame, and it's almost like a jump scare in and of itself, and then it cuts to the title sequence, and it really was a good way to start off this movie, because like I said, you had such tension build up of who is this in this car that's come up here, who is this girl going to meet, and why are they acting so weird, and then popping down in the frame, just the bizarreness and the unease that Nicolas Cage and his performance, just at least from the very vocal aspect of his performance, just was really creepy. And like I said, set that stage, set that tone of unease that just made you kind of creeped out, and that extended throughout the rest of the movie. This feeling of unease, this feeling of tension, and just, like I said, being creeped out the whole movie long. Now, they don't reveal it right away, but once you're introduced to the Micah Monroe character, Lee Harker, I put two and two together that the young girl that we met at the beginning of the movie back in 1974 this is an older version of her, and it's set in the 90s. We know that because the FBI head that she works with has a picture of President Clinton behind him. So we're into the 90s, into the Clinton administration, and this is some 20 so years later. But even meeting the Lee Harker character was really creepy, because this is a character that is very socially awkward. And they establish right away that she has an intuition about her. You would almost be safe to say that maybe she's a little bit psychic, but just the unease of her, like I said, social awkwardness, and how quiet she is, and how like matter of fact and analytical she is. It just makes for a very, like, you like her, you care about her, but you feel like you're kept at arm's length from her. And that's all from a performance standpoint. And that's tied with the moments that you get with Nicolas Cage and his character. There's just an atmosphere of unease and dread set throughout this whole film that I can't talk about that enough. I'm not going to keep repeating myself about that, but where this film lacked in like legitimate jump scares and scary things that go bump in the night moments, and it had a few of those, the more frightening aspect of this movie was this dread, this tense dread that builds throughout the movie, which I absolutely adored. And like I said, Maika Monroe's performance, I really enjoyed her as Lee Harker. She's a character that, like I said, is socially awkward and not comfortable around people. When she meets her boss, Agent Carter, and his wife and daughter, she's very awkward around them. But then you get her around her mother, and she opens up a little bit because she's more comfortable with her mother. And you get to see more facets to her than just her being, stereotypical socially awkward savant. And I have to say, I didn't even recognize her at first, because Maika Monroe, you're so used to seeing her with that blonde hair like in It Follows, like in Watcher, but her hair's darker in this, and just from the social awkwardness of her character, it really, I forgot this is Maika Monroe that I'm watching. It really felt like she became the character, which was really, to me, a good testament to her performance. Now, Nicolas Cage as Longlegs, I really loved his performance because it was so over the top. I mean, bombastic, over the top, like ridiculous, all bordering ridiculous Nicolas Cage. You get all of those elements, but in this movie, it really works, because I have to imagine that, I don't know whether it was Nicolas Cage, whether it was Odds Bodkins, who was the writer as well as the director, whether they worked on like a backstory for this character. But it almost feels like there's a backstory that we don't know for this character. He's got the very long hair. In the scene where the FBI come to pick him up, he's got this bag, like he's waiting at a bus stop. He's got this bag, and he's also got a guitar case with him. I have to imagine that they have some backstory concocted where he's always wanted to be, or maybe he was at one point, a part of like a 70s rock band. Maybe not a known rock band, but a band like that wanted to be Led Zeppelin, or through the 80s wanted to be, whoever, like one of the hair metal bands or something like that, Def Leppard, because when he speaks in a very sing-songy kind of way, and sometimes reaches up into this high falsetto, like almost like a Robert Plant style screaming. And it's a weird choice just on the surface, but when you think about it, that there must have been some sort of backstory that they concocted for him that had something where he always wanted to be a frontman for a band or a singer. And that, to me, helped, at least for me, it helped it make more sense as to some of the choices that they made for Nick Cage's performance as Longlegs. Now, you take that out of the equation, and just the creepiness of his lines and his delivery, and like the satanic innuendo and the doll making aspect of this character was just weird and bizarre. And you put on top of that, this performance is very over the top, almost like a frontman of a band style pomposity. It just made for such a weird and unnerving performance that the character was fascinating. And that scene where he's in the interrogation room and Micah Monroe's Lee Harker comes in and they're going back and forth having this tete-a-tete about whether he has an accomplice was just so engaging. And then all of a sudden when he has that line, "Hail Satan," and starts smashing his head into the desk until he smashes his face and kills himself, it was just so unnerving and frightening. That's where I say this kind of has a feel of Silence of the Lambs, where you have an FBI agent, female FBI agent, trying to solve a murder mystery and dealing with a serial killer, a psychopath. But then it had elements of The Omen for me in the satanic devil worshipping parts of this movie. Maybe not completely The Omen. There's no Antichrist, no, little kid devil or anything like that. But the satanic cult aspect of the original Omen movie. I thought that I just kept thinking about that. Every time somebody would say "Hail Satan," I would think about the nursemaid that jumps and hangs herself from the place in The Omen. A couple more characters I want to talk about just briefly that I really loved. Blair Underwood as Agent Carter. He's Lee Harker's superior. I really enjoyed his performance. Blair Underwood's performance really, to me, reminded me of like Keith David. If this movie, which is set in the 90s, if it was made in the 90s, I would bet Keith David would have been playing the Agent Carter role, because so much of Blair Underwood's performance just reminded me of like a younger Keith David, which I love Keith David. I love Blair Underwood as well, but just having him play this role and some of the ways he said things, some of the turns of phrase just reminded me of Keith David. And of course, another character I really loved was Alicia Witt as Ruth Harker, Lee's mother, and the mystery behind this character. Like when Lee talks to her on the phone, she acts really weird. It adds to the sense of unease about this movie. You have her acting really weird when she meets with Lee at the house, at Lee's childhood home. That moment where she asks if Lee is saying her prayers, and honestly, are you saying your prayers? And she says no, and good, because God doesn't answer prayers or something like that. It was really creepy, and you knew right away that this character, Ruth Harker, was hiding something. While it wasn't one of those things like, aha, I've solved the case, you knew that she knew more than she was letting on that she knows. And as more and more of the revelations of this mystery are put out there, the more and more you realize that she has more to do with this than we thought at the beginning. And then before you know it, you realize that she has been in the thick of this all along. That final scene, well, maybe not the final scene, but that showdown at Lee's childhood home where she goes to confront her mother and her relationship with Longlegs, and you see the car in the garage that's covered up by a tarp, but a part of it is uncovered, and you're like, oh shit, that's the car, the station wagon that Longlegs was driving around in at the beginning of the movie. And then you have that moment where Lee's mother kind of spills the beans, which was really creepy in and of itself. It was an exposition dump, but it was done in a bit of a flashback style that was really creepy, and telling the story about her run-in with Longlegs, and in order to save her daughter, she was his accomplice, and the whole doll making thing was weird and creepy, and the satanic ties to that, and him putting his satanic energy into these dolls and using them as a conduit to get into these homes and have Satan's work done. It was really interesting and bizarre and creepy. It was a serial killer movie, but it had aspects of the supernatural. It had aspects of magic and witchcraft to it that wasn't over the top, and it didn't seem completely far-fetched. I mean, if you're a skeptic, you're thinking it's terribly far-fetched. But if you even have a modicum of belief in the supernatural or belief in the spirit world or anything like that, angels and demons, that sort of thing, this was a story that dipped its toe into that, but didn't push you in. And I appreciated that because it kept the movie grounded in a serial killer reality, but had a bit of the unknown to make it palatable for somebody that wants a little more than just a regular human serial killer. Regular human serial killers you can put down with a bullet and everything's done. When you add a supernatural element or component, like the power of Satan and Satanism, then, how do you stop the devil? That to me is a little more of a daunting task that I find really interesting, and I like that they explored that a little bit with this character, Longlegs. So it was a very human story, but at the end of the day, it also had an element of the unexplained that made it all that much more dread and fear-inducing. And like I said, while this movie didn't have a ton of jump scares, it did have some jump scares. It had some scary moments, but it was a movie that depended more on the building of tension and dread and the atmosphere, the creepy atmosphere of the whole thing. It did have some kills, and it didn't have a ton of kills, but it had some interesting kills that I quite enjoyed. Now, they always did some of the flashbacks of some of the other families that Longlegs has killed with Lee's mother's help and using these dolls to get into these homes so Satan's power could be wrought, and you get to see some of these murders happen. Some of them a little more graphic than others, but that was interesting. When Longlegs killed himself by smashing his face, that was disgusting and gross. And then, of course, you had the other agent, Agent Browning, played by Michelle Choi Lee. Not a character that's in the movie a lot. She was in it in a few scenes. Did a wonderful job for what was asked of her. But her death, while you didn't see it happening, you didn't see the shotgun blast to her head, you saw the aftermath of it inside the car. Like, you saw the gun go off in the window and the blood splatter against the windshield. That was definitely one where it would have been gory and super disgusting to watch, but you didn't need to watch that. Just seeing that explosion of blood inside that car left it to your imagination, and sometimes that's the more scary thing. To see it is disgusting and it's shocking, but sometimes it's not scary when you're left to your own devices as to how something played out, when you have to use your imagination to fill in the blanks. Sometimes that can be even more scary than actually seeing it on the screen. And I thought, to me, that was one of the more effective. Like, when it happened, I was like, oh, fuck. It was that kind of moment. Now, like I said, a lot of people unhappy and unsatisfied with the end. You have the final kill. You have Lee's mother bringing the doll of Agent Carter's daughter to her daughter for her birthday. It was kind of a tense moment. You have this kind of race against the clock of Lee Harker trying to get there to stop her mother, to stop Agent Carter from turning psycho because of the influence of Satan and killing his family. The wife wasn't saved, but she ends up shooting him. I don't think he died. It looked like it was all shots to the shoulders and arm, but she stops him and conceivably rescues the daughter. Although she did not blow the head off of the doll, which the doll has that metal quote-unquote brain in it. And we saw when Lee's mother shot the doll that represented Lee, like this almost mist came off of her. And you almost have to wonder if that cloudy haze that came off of her is what made her so socially awkward and made her so willing to keep everyone at arm's length. But maybe then also that was part of the reason why she did have a bit of clairvoyance about her. And there again, nothing they ever really explained too much. It definitely is enough to keep you wondering. Makes me want to watch this movie over again. But I really enjoyed the ending. I thought that it was an abrupt ending, but what else needed to be said? Did you want just a bunch of exposition and a denouement explaining, well, this is what happened and da-da-da-da? I didn't need that. I had enough explained to me that I can put two and two together as to how this plays out from there, or maybe it is left open-ended enough that I don't know where it goes from there. But it gives me the opportunity to posit to myself what may have happened next. Lee Harker blew her mother's brains out and saved the girl, but the doll is still in play. How will that affect the daughter? Ruby, I think her name was. There's just it left a lot of questions. It definitely was an open-ended ending, which sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. In this case, it worked enough for me, but I know it didn't work for a lot of people. But ultimately, this movie was an enjoyable movie. It just was a beautiful movie to watch. The cinematography I thought was really good. They played a lot with color and light, and I thought the set design and the costume design was all really good as far as fitting certain periods, time periods like the 70s and the 90s. I really enjoyed that. The direction I thought was fantastic. The performances were top notch, especially from Micah Monroe and Nicolas Cage. Loved both of their performances in this weird, creepy, bizarre movie. And I really enjoyed the mystery of it. You had this FBI agent trying to solve this mystery with this serial killer and these ciphers. And to me, that was all really interesting. How her solving the case came about because she's getting help from this killer. This killer is actually helping her figure this out because she's more entwined in this. She's more involved in this than she remembers. And there again, when the mother blows the head off that doll and the quote-unquote brain inside the doll and that kind of dark mist comes off her head, maybe that is the representation of her forgetting, that she ever had a run-in with Longlegs when she was a kid. But you have all these bits of the mystery that help solve the mystery, but also bring the Lee Harker character closer to understanding her role in all of this and her mother's role in all of this. And to me, that was really entertaining and really engaging. And one of the things I found very interesting about this movie, that it kept me engaged as an audience member because of the mystery, and then of course the horror and the dread and the uneasy feel made me love it as a horror film. And the fact that they did it old school, where the Satanists are the bad guys. These days, they'll make you think that the devil's the bad guy and the Satanists are the bad guy, but it's really the church. The church is the real bad guy, and they're the real problem. That's that new wave of the good guys are really the bad guys. They were the bad guys all along. We just were gaslit into thinking they were the good guys. It's kind of like what Star Wars is doing with the Jedi. The Jedi were the bastions of goodness and hope throughout the galaxy for many years in the Star Wars canon. Now all of a sudden, thanks to the Acolyte and all the other bullshit that's been going on with the Disney Plus shows, the Jedis are really the bad guys. And that bullshit, like I said, I'll talk about that when I talk about the Acolyte coming up. Actually, the Acolyte and the Boys both coming to an end this week. So next week we'll be talking about both of those series. I have thoughts on both of them, and both thoughts are polar opposites of one another. But there again, we'll talk about that. But that's, like I said, usually in today's cinema, horror cinema, whenever the devil is brought into it, the devil worshippers are just misunderstood. And I liked how this went old school, and the devil worshippers are the bad guys, and the devil is not just sad and misunderstood. But what can I say? I'm an old school kind of guy. But really love this movie. I really enjoyed it. Like I said, I don't know if it's my favorite movie of the year. It's at the very least, when I do my end of year top 10 list of my favorite horror films, this is definitely probably going to be in the top 5. I can't see it not being in the top 5. Don't hold me to that, because I could change my mind. But as of right now, definitely in my top 5 favorite horror films of 2024. So I want to thank everyone for listening to my thoughts on Longlegs. You can check it out in movie theaters right now if you haven't. If you have, hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I did. If not, hey, not every movie is for everyone. But if you've been on the fence, hopefully I've convinced you that you do need to check this movie out. It's a good psychological horror / thriller. that was directed excellently by Anthony Perkins, baby boy Oz Perkins, and a really good cast and a really good horror film that I, for one, particularly enjoyed. So I want to thank everyone for listening to my thoughts. You can check out more about what's going on with Odds Bodkins Curiosity Shoppe on our social media pages, Instagram and Facebook. We're always posting about horror, fantasy, and science fiction. No matter where you listen to this podcast, like, follow, subscribe to it to stay on top of all the latest episodes. Leave those reviews. 5 stars would be awesome, but whatever review you leave, we do appreciate that. And as always, please share this podcast with anyone that you know that loves horror, fantasy, and science fiction. Help us spread the word, help us grow our numbers so we can keep doing what we love to do here. So I want to thank everyone for listening, and until next time. Thank you for visiting Odds Bodkins Curiosity Shoppe. We hope that you found something to your liking and visit the shop again soon. But even though you may come back, you never really get to leave Odds Bodkins Curiosity Shoppe.